Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, but please call me Alex, and I'm here to talk to everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today I'm joined by guest Ian Gotts to talk about Elements.Cloud. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
So for those who want to know a bit more who you are, could you give us a brief intro to who you are and what you do?
Probably I can do it in three numbers. So 30 years in technology, starting at Accenture. And in that time, I was really focused on business analysis. I think my first project in Accenture was to map out an ERP system. So 30 years in technology and business analysis, 20 years as a Salesforce customer. In fact, 21 years, I'm allowed to drink now. And then 10 years of really being in and around the Salesforce ecosystem as a partner. We sold the last company in 2011 and then started thinking about how the three founders from the last company got together to build the next one. And we said, well, let's go and work alongside Salesforce. So that was over 10 years ago. So 30, 2010.
30, 21, 10, but close.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
So you are the founder and I believe CEO of the company called Elements.Cloud. What does Elements.Cloud do?
Well, if I'm being sort of trite, I'd say it helps the platform owner or the CIO sleep at night. Let's dig into that a bit more. Why is that? We're providing the place where everyone can document the changes that they've made, either automatically because we're doing all the automatic analysis of someone's org, but also all that manual documentation. All of that's in one place, which means that the teams are able to make changes with confidence that nothing's going to break, which means that they can do things faster. And ultimately, that means that you're getting better value out of Salesforce, which is really what the person who's the sponsor for Salesforce is aiming for. Salesforce is hugely powerful and it needs to stay agile. So Elements provides that agility by really providing that place where all of the institutional knowledge is there so people can make good decisions. So I guess the space is called change intelligence because it helps you make changes with intelligence.
Oh, I like that name, Change Intelligence. So, I mean, this is obviously filling a gap that Salesforce itself doesn't do. How did you come up with the idea of building this product?
Actually, we came about it a roundabout way, and I think it's probably true of most founders. They start off with an idea in one direction, and the moment you start talking to customers, they say, well, that's great, but if you could do X, that would be even better. And if you could do Y, that would be even better. So we really started off with how do you map out business processes? How do you understand how the operation works? And that really was based on our history, the previous company, which I ran for 14 years. So we were at business process mapping for highly regulated companies. So we started with that. And probably Elements is best known for that UPN, Universal Process Notation, process mapping standard. But as we got into it fairly quickly, customers said, that's great. But if you could also link that back to why we're making the changes. So if we could understand the requirements and maybe the user stories. And then even more importantly, if you could tell us what we've already changed in our org. So if you could do the analysis of all the metadata and all the dependencies, and therefore the product grew out from process mapping through to sort of impact and org analysis. And then as we looked at it, we said, well, we need to complete the whole circle. Everything from capturing feedback, capturing requirements, mapping business processes, mapping architecture diagrams, then writing user stories, handing those across to the development teams. And then once you've deployed, then providing the support and training. And really we're really supporting that whole life cycle. And as you said, Salesforce isn't doing that. Salesforce has launched DevOps Center, which is really a replacement for change sets. So we tie into that, which really helps us complete that whole cycle. And clearly we're growing very, very fast. So there's clearly a need. And that need is not for just big corporates. It's across the board. Some of our most passionate users are nonprofits. In fact, I was at TDX week before last, and a company or a nonprofit called Food and Water Watch came to me and he said, I'm the platform owner here. Just wanted to say hello. I just wanted to say how excited we are to be using Elements, how much value it's giving us, even as a small nonprofit. So I think it's just as valid to a nonprofit as it is to large organizations. We're all trying to get the most out of Salesforce. We're all trying to make sure it works for us.
That's awesome. You mentioned, though, that a small nonprofit. So because it sounds like there's, a lot of features, obviously, with the product, a lot of different places you can go Some agencies or some organizations might not use all of them, but is there a value or is there a threshold where you'd recommend it for a certain size of organization, a small nonprofit versus a medium versus a large? Or do you think there's value to be added at any level?
I think unless you have taken Salesforce and you're not intending to make any changes, and I guess that's valid if you're a nonprofit and you've got 10 licenses and you just installed the nonprofit success pack. But I can't believe there are many organizations out there who aren't going to take advantage of the ability to customize Salesforce. The moment you do that, then so Elements will help you, because what you need to do is make sure you're building the right thing. Make sure that before you start like creating objects, creating fields, creating flows, you're very clear about exactly what you should be building. Make sure you've really engaged the end users to say, what exactly do you need? Ask the 5 whys. So why do you want to do that? Okay, I get that, but why, but why, but why? And now, therefore, you can get a very crisp understanding about what your end users need, not what they thought they want. And bear in mind, the end users for a nonprofit is not just the people who work for the nonprofit, but think about all the volunteers. They're all end users too. So actually, a nonprofit is often way larger than the 5, 10, 30 people who are working in it if it's a small nonprofit. So if you're making any changes, then you need to be really clear about why you're making the changes, and therefore you need to capture requirements. You need to try and understand the business processes of that particular area. You need to write a user story, even if it's very simple before you start the development. These are all good business practices that need to happen no matter how big or small your organization is. So whether you use Elements or not, I spend my time on my soapbox, passionately trying to get people to do this properly, no matter what size they are, whether they use Elements or not. Obviously, I think Elements is a great answer because all of that information is all connected, and then we connect it back to all the changes that are being made inside your Salesforce org, which then gives you that sort of that picture of the entire org, which then makes you able to make changes more quickly. But whether you're small or large, if provided you're making changes to Salesforce, then you need to start to adopt some of these best practices.
And you kind of alluded to a certain process where you've got identifying your business processes, capturing feedback, architecture, working with change sets, support. Is there a particular methodology to using Elements.Cloud?
No, we tend not to be prescriptive. I mean, we're providing the underlying support for whatever methodology, whether it's agile, waterfall, or anything in between. But there is a generally accepted way that people do things nowadays. You're capturing feedback from end users, you're turning that into some business requirements, which may be quite high level. You're then validating those requirements by understanding the business processes. You're probably designing it and starting to build some architecture diagrams. Maybe you're designing an ERD, an entity relationship diagram, to understand that the flow between different objects and the relationship between objects. And then you're building a user story. A user story is the standard way of transferring work from the business analysis to IT. So none of this is dramatically different from the way that anybody works. We're supporting the way that people normally work or should work in terms of that business analysis through to development lifecycle. And I talked about change sets. Obviously, change sets is the way that most people make changes inside an org. If they're not able to build a business case for a more sophisticated DevOps product. The good news is that from June onwards, there'll be an open beta. So DevOps Center will be replacing change sets. So it's starting people on the path of more rigorous deployment. I'd encourage everybody to take a look at that. Way easier than change sets, and it starts you on the path of source-driven DevOps. But before those terms scare people, all of the stuff behind the scenes around managing source and GitHub, that's all hidden behind the scenes in terms of DevOps Center. In fact, I just wrote an article recently with Salesforce Ben about DevOps Center. So I think no matter how small you are, then you need to be employing these sorts of practices for making sure you're getting the best out of Salesforce. And if it's valid for you, it's valid all the way up, no matter how big you are. I mean, we're dealing with some of Salesforce's largest customers, clearly large, complex orgs, but they're doing the same thing. They're going around the same cycle.
I imagine, too, that one of the many advantages would be from an organization's perspective, if you're working with one partner for a certain period of time and they're doing, their configuration, consulting, and so forth, and then for one reason or another, you stop using them and you shift to another partner, that the documentation that you have in Elements.Cloud can persist so that they don't start from zero. They don't need to reverse engineer what's there in the code. They can actually go to Elements.Cloud and see where things are and have a much quicker understanding of why decisions were made and then continue the configuration.
Absolutely. I mean, you've captured the value proposition very, very crisply there. I think also non-profits have a unique situation, which is someone says, "Oh, I want to volunteer. I'll volunteer for a non-profit." So often non-profits have like a rotating set of admins who come through. Some may be very experienced, some may be very inexperienced. And again, without that lack of documentation, very quickly the org becomes spaghetti, becomes chaos. And again, decent documentation means at least that there is some handoff between this rotating cast of admins that have come in plus the consultancies. And any not even non-profit, but any company who has a consultancy who comes in and does the work and doesn't demand that they leave them with decent documentation is doing themselves a disservice. Part of the work that the consulting should be doing is not just configuring the application, but it should be leaving enough documentation so that the organization is able to support themselves after the consultancy has left.
I think that's one of the worst, or at least the most commonly forgotten piece, is documentation. Like Salesforce does obviously have a minimal options available to you to write, descriptions or help text, why you created certain fields or objects, but it doesn't really give a picture. It's really, specific to a specific field or a specific object, versus sounds like a much more holistic perspective, and it gives you a much better and more accurate picture of what's going on in the org.
I think holistic is the important term there, because you could say like, what does this field do? But actually, it's in the context of what is his overall business flow, or you've created a flow which takes data out of two fields and populates two more fields. Well, that documentation needs to cover not just the flow, but cover those fields. So that's the first thing. The second thing is people often document what they did. Well, I can work out what you did. I can see there's a validation rule. I want to know why you did it. And that why documentation is you need to write that down in the moment when you did it, when you remember. People say, "Oh, I'll do that later." Okay. There is no later in this world. By the time you get to later, you'll never get around to doing it. So we need to make it really, really easy for people to capture the documentation at the moment they're doing it. And it may be as simple as saying, "Well, I took a photograph of a whiteboard. Great. Let's just copy that image in. Oh, we've got a specification. That's a Google Doc. Great. Link that. Oh, I've got a flowchart over here, and I don't want to rewrite it as a UPN diagram. Great. Link it." So I think about 3 C's. The first is content. We need to get this content wherever it is, whether it's a short video, an image, a process diagram, some notes that somebody made. Okay, so that's content. The second C is connections. Let's connect these things together. So suddenly we've got a user story connected to 3 bits of metadata. That user story has got the documentation associated with why we wanted to do it. That's all connected. So I'm now building the history of why those metadata items changed. And then the last C is context, which is when I want to look at it, I want to look at it in the context of something. This user story is associated with, we need to update our volunteer process. So we've actually got a new object and some new flows around volunteering. Great, there's a user story saying we're going to update that. Now I can look at the various metadata items, the process content, the documentation in the context of that change. All of that's possible when it's all connected. It's really, really hard if that's it. 3 Google Docs is over here in a free app that we used. Over here, it's a database I built. Oh, it's a custom object I built. The real power is getting it all together. So it's content, connections, and then context.
Yeah, that why question, why did we do certain things, I think is one of the most important things. And that's the easiest thing to get lost along the way. Is there any sense of versioning? Like, because there's a lot of now documents, links, connections, like you said, context. Is there any sense or is there a feature that exists within Elements.Cloud that has to do with versioning, of knowing, okay, we tried this version first, it didn't quite work, we'll move to version 2 or option 2. That kind of works, but then let's go towards, let's say, option 2B.
So certainly around all of the process maps and, say, architecture diagrams, which is sort of diagramming, that's all versioned. When you're starting to make changes to any metadata, clearly that's being versioned inside Salesforce. If you're looking at, say, Google Docs, then there's versioning inside Google Docs if you've linked those things. So yeah, there is versioning, but the ultimate versioning is a release. So we're saying, okay, we've now got a new release of, say, our volunteer program. We can now see the release is a collection of user stories. Those user stories are connected to a series of metadata items and a set of documentation. So often people think about a release, okay, I'm going to release all these changes into Salesforce. I get that, but at the same time, we ought to be releasing all the process documentation, all the help and training material. So we think about a release in a broader sense. And then there is that version there, which is you can look at a release and look at all the things that got pushed with it. So you can start to see how things change. But you're also building a level of control into we shouldn't release until everything's complete. So again, it's implied in the way we built the application is trying to encourage some best practices in terms of the way you should be building and changing systems.
In terms of best practices, I saw that there's a lot of visualization in the app. So it's not just text-based. There's I don't know if it's mind maps or versioning maps. Why did you find that visualization was so important?
I think the first thing is that a Salesforce, if we just think about Salesforce orgs for the moment, obviously visualization of process maps, I think everyone's understood that whether it's a flowchart style or a process map, it's so much easier to understand things when it's a diagram rather than a huge document of text. And if I think about process for a moment, the devil is in the detail, genuinely, unless you understand what the handoffs are between different processes and you can really get into that detail, then there's a level of ambiguity. I mean, too many times I see senior management doing process mapping in the air. They sort of wave their arms around and go, well, this happens, and that happens, and that happens. Okay, what I really need to do is be very specific. Okay, what's that process? Starts with a verb. What's the handoff? What's the activity? So this is a qualified lead. Okay, what does a qualified lead count as? What does a signed off donor count as? Okay, let's be very specific about that. So I think some of it is in terms of the way you capture that information. So again, process is very visual. When we think about sort of Salesforce, the org itself, we're looking at huge, huge orgs. Even if you're a nonprofit, the moment you install the nonprofit success pack, you've certainly made the org quite complicated. And therefore, to be able to see, okay, this field is acted on by 20 flows, it's got 72 reports that are touching it, it's got 4 validation rules. It's very difficult to try and pick your way through setup to try and work that out. So we created this idea of a dependency tree. So yeah, you can see that field has got these things that are happening to it. But then those 20 flows may kick other things off. So this idea of an expanding tree enables you very quickly to get an understanding of the complexity of something. So yeah, changing this field. Oh, well, that can't be that hard. Oh, look at the dependency tree. Wow, I didn't realize there was quite as much implied. Therefore, this is going to take longer. Versus, oh, look at this field, or I look at this, I'm about to go and change this flow. Okay, it doesn't touch very much. I can very visually, very quickly see, okay, the level of risk and therefore how I should be applying the changes. So that's useful for you as someone who's making the changes, but that visualization is really useful when you're going back and talking to your executive team and they're saying, well, why can't this be done quickly? You can very quickly go, well, let me just explain to you what's implied in making those changes. And therefore, I need to take the time to do this properly or we're likely to break the org.
So hang on a second. Are you saying you can actually see the entire chain as you go from various automation within Salesforce to various automation? Like if I were to have, I'll use a more technical term, like a record triggered flow that causes an action to happen. And then by changing a field, that will initiate another process or another flow, which will then cause Apex to run, which will then, you have this cascading chain of commands. Are you saying that you can actually track that visually within Elements.Cloud?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we track all those dependencies automatically. So we're actually building that complete picture of all of that we're used. And again, it's hard to do. It's taken tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lines of code to be able to do that because that's code we've written. So absolutely that visualization, but it goes way further than that. So we've just talked about Salesforce, but if you then connect Salesforce to, okay, if you've got managed packages, then we do that for you automatically. But let's say you're now using a third-party system for, say, accounting, and you're using a Sage for accounting or Xero. There's no reason why you shouldn't build a dictionary for Xero or for Oracle or NetSuite or Slack or whatever, and then link that flow. Because if that flow kicks off something in, say, MuleSoft or Zapier, and then from Zapier it goes into, say, a financial system, You can create dictionaries for Zapier, dictionaries for your financial system, and connect those links between metadata and then they will appear in that visualization map as well. Because Salesforce is no longer an island. We need to know that that flow kicks off something which goes to, say, Zapier for integration. And then it goes from there, it goes into, say, Oracle, but then Oracle kicks something back into Salesforce. We need to know all those connections. We can't just believe that Salesforce, I make those changes and nothing happens outside.
That's brilliant. That truly is the holistic view, because you're totally right. Salesforce is not an island, and more often than not, you have to integrate it with various other external systems. So that's truly the holistic picture, the entire picture of the system.
Yeah, and I've been drawing that picture on whiteboards around boardrooms for the last couple of years, and the release for TDX finally put the last piece of the puzzle in place to be able to do all of that. So this podcast is well timed. That I can now say that yes, that exists rather than that's in the roadmap.
So, I mean, it sounds like it's more than a powerhouse. This is like almost a necessity for most organizations. Do you find that it's overwhelming for a customer, or let's say a nonprofit in this case, to implement it itself? Would it be more to their advantage to work with a consultant to help them implement it and document it and so forth? Or is it simple enough to use, or not simple enough to use, but is it not overwhelming so that the customer themselves, you think, could use it?
I think if you said, okay, we're going to overhaul the whole application lifecycle management approach, then either someone needs to champion that inside the organization or maybe a consultancy come in. But we see organizations start with, okay, I simply need to understand the org. So it starts with org understanding. So 2 minutes to connect to the org. About, I don't know, anywhere between sort of an hour and 2 or 3 hours later, we will have completely indexed the org for you and produced all of that dependency information. So that's the starting point. Very quickly, you can go from nothing to, wow, I've now got at least a picture of my org. Then it's a case of getting some of the disciplines of saying, document it now. So let's pick an area, the next project you're working on. As you start creating new objects or think about new objects, let's start developing some decent documentation. Let's start with some early requirements. Let's make sure we have the odd process map. So you can step your way into this. This is not like stop everything. For the next 6 months, we're going to implement Elements. We've designed this so you can get a ton of value really quickly. And from that, you can then pick off what you need to go and do next. Yeah, you may not be writing user stories yet. Maybe that's beyond you, but certainly you can. The next time you write a specification, you can link it to the metadata item or to the flow. So you can take some baby steps in terms of building that documentation. And that will only grow over time. So people go, well, maybe I'll start later. No. Start now, because if you start now, then you're building that institutional knowledge. You're building up that picture of your org. Every time even if it's like 280 characters, the equivalent of a tweet, just put it in there. Why did I do this? And you're building up that picture about why things work. Let me take an example of not a nonprofit, but I was talking to JD Power at CDX, who are a customer of ours. And Viv, who was the platform owner, she said it came in and actually didn't really understand the org. It was rather complex. People couldn't do things they wanted to do. And she said, that it was triage. How does someone raise a quote? Well, the first job was no one really understood it. So very quickly, they produced some simple documentation, attached it to the quote, to the fields around the quote, and just explained what they needed to do. So without having to go and change the systems, which is what they really ought to do because they had to go and simplify it, the sort of triage was, let's just put in place some notes linked to fields so people can at least understand what they're meant to be doing. And there's a button there where they can leave feedback. So they're starting the cycle of collecting feedback from people to go, okay, how should we be changing this? So I think there are some simple things that you can do to get started. Sync the org, get an understanding about where the complexity is, get some simple principles of documentation, and then try and pick off the areas where you've got the most problem. And then if you want to work with one of our customer success team, who can help you work out what areas of the product will help you most quickly to start to alleviate some of the pain.
So I imagine you offer some kind of training programs or courses. Do you also have any kinds of certifications in Elements?
So there's certainly training, which is certainly a lot more than you'd expect out of Trailhead. It is not quite the level of certification, although we are working on that. So if you go to academy.elements.cloud, yes, there's all the training courses around, best practices of all the things that we've been talking about. There's also a playground. So anybody can go to Elements, register. It will give you a free playground. You can connect that to a DevOrg. So all of the capabilities of the full enterprise product are available forever in a playground. So again, maybe you don't feel confident day one of connecting it to an org. So at least you can get an understanding about how it works.
You answered already one of my questions I was going to ask is there ever a good time or a bad time to start using it? And it sounds like it doesn't really matter whether you're just about to start your first Salesforce org or you've been doing it for X number of years, as long as you gradually do add to the Elements.Cloud product, you're able to get some valuable outcomes out of it.
Yeah, I think the tipping point for us was about a couple of years ago when we had built enough capability in the automated dependencies where someone out of the box could push the button and a couple of hours later they could look at their org in a way they'd never seen it before. Until then, people were going, well, I could do it, but it takes work and I really don't want to. There's a lot of documentation I need to do. So we're providing a lot of that automated documentation for you. And I think that gives you a great sort of launch off point. And then you can start doing the simple things, which is, I made a change. Let's just attach something, take a photograph of the whiteboard, take a photograph of the screenshot, just attach it and build up from there. And again, there's no good time to get started. But I do think you need to find maybe a catalyst of some sort. So use a project. We've got a particular project and use that as the reason to get started. Because nobody likes change. So if you want people to change slightly the way they behave, then use the project, a particular area, a particular initiative to drive that.
Yeah, change is definitely one of the biggest challenges, especially for nonprofits. They're used to doing things a certain way, and they're not always ready to try new things. Is there any particular way that you have to overcome their obstacles by showing them the benefits of this product?
Well, I think the first thing is that often we talk to people who are admins and going, this is amazing, but I can't afford it. And the answer is no, you're right, you can't, because you're not the platform owner. If you're the executive director or the platform owner who actually sees the whole value around the lifecycle in terms of, as we said at the very beginning of this talk, can sleep better at night because he knows that all of the teams, whether they are admins, developers, business analysts, are all working to a common picture. The platform owner gets it and goes, absolutely, this is worth it. I can see the value here. So building that business case with a platform owner is relatively straightforward because they see the value they're writing the check for Salesforce, and therefore they see the value in actually exploiting it. Quite often, if you're maybe an admin in one area, you can see the benefits, but you can't see why it would be worth going to your boss to try and get the budget. Often in nonprofits, I hear we can't afford this for just a poor nonprofit. The answer is, well, actually, our pricing is geared to the size of somebody's org. So it's in proportion to how much you're spending on Salesforce. So it's not a question of you can't afford it. If you can afford Salesforce, then you probably can afford Elements to make Salesforce work better. So don't just make the decision, okay, we have to use free tools, we have to use spreadsheets. I know it takes us forever, but we couldn't possibly consider using something else. That's not true at all. Your senior executives have decided that it's worth investing in Salesforce, it's worth investing in some of the tools to make Salesforce work better. So don't make those decisions for them. Take them the option of, okay, here's a product X, it's Elements, it could be one of another product, it could be a great forms product, it could be a great product for DevOps. Don't say we can't afford this. Go back to your executive management with why you think it's a good idea and let them decide, because they have a broader picture, a broader perspective on the value they're going to get from it. So I think that with all of the things, that's probably the biggest barrier that we see nowadays. In terms of getting people to change, if people see a better way of doing things, then they will change, provided there's a nice start point. There's an initiative we're just doing. There's a new release we're going to push through. That suddenly is what is forcing people to, okay, right, we'll now use a new product, we'll get some benefits from it. I can't think of a single customer who has seen a view of their org, which we've shown them, and gone, oh no, I don't want to see that. No, I'm a lot happier making changes without knowing what's going to happen when I hit the deploy button. It's something which arguably Salesforce should be providing to every customer. They don't. That's the beauty of the ecosystem and why the partners like us have got an opportunity to go fill the white space.
I read on your website, that it was endorsed by Salesforce. What does that mean exactly?
Oh, so that will be the process mapping approach called UPN, Universal Process Notation. That's been endorsed by Salesforce. That's if you go to Trailhead, that's the way that they suggest that you should be mapping processes. And obviously, we're an app exchange product, which means that Salesforce has gone through their security reviews on a periodic basis with us to make sure that the product is secure. And that's part of the benefit of being part of an ecosystem like Salesforce. You can have confidence that if products are on the app exchange, that you can have confidence that they work and they've been security checked.
Another benefit I can see, and I think I read this also on the website, was the ability to reduce technical debt. What does that mean in terms of identifying technical debt? Like, what is technical debt, and how does Elements reduce technical debt?
Okay, well, first of all, let's go for the definition of technical debt. Technical debt is where you've made some changes to the system which now are actually making it harder for you to make future changes. Now, it may be because those changes you made, it may be because I know that feature didn't exist in Salesforce when you created it, but now Salesforce has now got that feature, and therefore it's technical debt. It may be because you took a shortcut. You knew it was the wrong thing to do, but you needed to get something out quickly, and you knew that actually it was going to cause problems. Or it may be just because the business has moved on, and therefore those features are no longer relevant. But because it's technical debt, it's sitting there, and it's making it hard to get new changes in. So that's the first thing. The second thing is not all technical debt is the same. So technical debt in an area which never gets changed is not an issue. It's not hurting anybody. It's not making life difficult. Technical debt in an area which is constantly being changed is really painful because it's taking you longer to get releases out. So the first thing about technical debt is identifying where it is, and then secondly, identifying how important it is. So how does Elements help? Well, the first thing is think about that visualization. Technical debt is knowing that this field is touched by 20 flows, of which only 3 of them are being used regularly. But those flows are still there and you're needing to maintain them. But those flows are being touched are now more flows or kicking off Apex. So suddenly we're giving you a visualization of the true extent of that technical debt. So therefore you can start to scope the work it takes to reduce that technical debt. But the other thing is it's telling you how important it is to fix that technical debt, whether it genuinely is having an impact. And again, very difficult to make changes unless you have a clear understanding of the implication of those changes. The classic example is, I use this free app which tells me whether fields have got data in it. So like field trip. And you go, I can delete that field because it has no data. Oh, hang on a minute. I can think of 8 reasons why you shouldn't delete a field because it's empty. Maybe that field actually is empty because it's only used at the end of the year because it's used in the integration with Oracle. You delete that field and you don't discover it's a problem until 9 months later, until we do the end of year reconciliation. So we need to be very careful that we're taking a full picture about how we reduce that technical debt. Okay. Is there data in a field? Where's it used? How often is it used? Who uses it? Is there any documentation? And another area of technical debt is managed packages. People often install managed packages just to trial and they get left there. So again, Elements will help you understand which managed packages aren't being used so you can pull them out.
I often consider a managed package to be a black box. I put things into it, I get things out of it, but I don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. So just to get any insight on it, on how it's being used and the broader context of it is to me a win.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got stories of people who've installed the Trailhead badge managed packages inside orgs, and then someone's then taken those managed packages and started customizing them. So then you can't even get it out. But so yeah, understanding, is there any data in those managed packages, but then have they been used? Have those fields been used elsewhere? And then when was the last time that any data was put in them? So at least you get some understanding about whether you could pull it out. I mean, at the simplest level, we talked about documentation. When you add a managed package, please just say who owns it. Please just say why you put it there. So when someone comes back 6 months later, they've got some documentation attached to the managed package that says why you put it in there and who to go and talk to if you want to do something with it. So it's just simple stuff that we're talking about here. But again, simple stuff that's not, if you don't do it across the whole org, people come back to it 2 months, 6 months, 3 years later, and they have no idea whether they can delete it. So they just add new stuff on top of it, and that builds on that technical debt.
Have you ever done or tried to attempt to do a list of all the other applications that Elements.Cloud effectively replaces or is better than. Like I'm thinking of like the Lucid charts, certain field descriptions, and so forth. Have you ever tried to quantify like how much you save or how effective it is to have it in one, all these different elements, all these different features from different products all in one space?
Yeah, that's interesting. We tend not to do that. And there's one reason, which is if someone's already built a bunch of content in Lucidchart, telling someone to throw all those process maps away and redraw them in Elements is not necessarily realistic. Instead, we'd prefer to say, if you've got that and they are still valid, just link them. But to answer your question, you could look around the capabilities of our product and go, well, what are you using for requirements? Oh, well, we built a custom object, or we've got a Google Sheet. Okay, well, you don't need that. What are you using for process maps? Oh, well, we're using a bit of Visio, some Lucidchart. We've also got some Google Sheets. Okay, well, you don't need that. Okay, what are you using for user stories? Well, we've got another custom database that we built. So it's not necessarily replacing those applications, but it's actually having all that in one place and connected. So it makes it a lot easier to make those connections if they are all in one application. If we look at the area of, say, org analysis, understanding what's in the org, then there are quite a few free tools out there. And the problem with many of them is that they're all covering an area. And therefore, you need to have collected 5 or 6 of them together to even get a complete picture that even gets close to what Elements is doing. And then you've got the problem, which is the data's in 5 or 6 different places or 4 or 5 different places, so it's never aggregated. The power of knowing, is a field populated? Where's the field used? And genuinely knowing everywhere it's used, not just half the places it's used. And then understanding what documentation is linked to it, and then what help documentation is connected to it, all in one place, is really powerful, rather than having to go to 4 or 5 different applications. And this is my sort of free is not free conversation, which is people go, oh, but I could use, a Happy Soup or OrgCheck or OrgConfig into a spreadsheet, or I could use Fieldtrip. They're all free apps. But by the time you've tried to pull all them together to get a consolidated picture, how much effort is that taking you? And what's the risk of making a mistake because you didn't pick something up? And the ongoing impact of that in terms of your org. So rather than the cost of don't use those applications because of cost, it's more a case of, am I getting better change intelligence so I can make better decisions so I can move faster? Doing that is not about reducing the cost. It's actually about accelerating the upside in terms of using Salesforce. Can I get those new changes in, which means that we can support our highest paying donors? We need that application out really quickly. Let's get that out safely and make the changes to it safely. The upside on that is huge. It's not about, can I save a few pounds here, a few dollars there, because I've got a free product or a free product and a free add-on. So we tend to think about how we can incorporate the content people have already got, but then build one picture of all that knowledge in one place so you can make the right decisions more quickly.
Right. That second C in content, connections, and context. Love it. So this whole concept of change intelligence, is this something that's relatively new?
I think maybe the term is new. I mean, people are talking about change intelligence more and more, but yes, the term is relatively new. But I think it's just an encapsulation of a set of principles that have been around for a long time. I think, as we said at the beginning, I've been around IT about 30 years. I got out some of my Accenture methodology manuals dated 1979. And you go, well, the cloud changes all that. Well, you might think so, but of the 19 major activities in implementing a system, only 2 of them aren't required anymore. And those 2 are installing software and installing hardware. All the other activities of understanding requirements, business design, architecture, managing change, training, all of those are still completely valid. I think what's different now with the cloud is the pace of change, and also the ability for people who are citizen developers to make those changes, the admins making declarative changes. So I think a couple of things. One is that Salesforce has grown very quickly, and it's grown from 20 years ago when I first started using Salesforce, a very simple product, to being now a hugely sophisticated and powerful product. And it now requires that level of robust management that we're now talking about. So these concepts may feel new, but if you've been building SAP systems, then you'd recognize everything we've been talking about. because Salesforce has grown from being a simple system to more complex and very powerful, these approaches now need to be relevant. So that's the first thing, that these principles are absolutely proven over the years. But now we're doing things at pace and we have far more complex configuration, hence the need for this idea of impact analysis. And we've got the power through the Salesforce APIs and the coding that Elements has done to be able to produce that picture of the changes. So again, that concept is new in the Salesforce world. Again, go back 20 years, SAP had a concept called Solution Manager, which is very similar to what I guess Elements is now producing for Salesforce. So we're now, that concept of change intelligence is pulling together existing concepts and then the content that you can pull out of Salesforce to make that change happen faster. So not new, maybe new to many people in the Salesforce ecosystem, refreshing to those of us who've been battling away in the trenches doing this manually for years. It's refreshing that now applications like Elements can do a lot of the hard work really easily for you.
So how does a consultant or an organization get started with Elements.Cloud?
Well, I think the first thing is that you need to recognize that actually you care enough about managing change. As I said, if you're a small nonprofit where change is you make very little change, then this is probably not relevant. But if you're an organization that says, yes, we make changes, yes, we want to try and manage them better, yeah, we have technical debt, yeah, we have poor documentation, yes, we're trying to change faster. If the answer is to yes to any of those, then take a look at what Elements can offer. As I said, if you're a customer, talk to us. Do a 2-week proof of concept, plug it in, see what you get, build a business case for yourself about whether this will work for you. If you're a consultant, it's way easier. I mean, the consultancy model is if you're a consultant, it's $500 per year for one license for your use. You can plug it into as many orgs as you want, so you can use it on every single customer. So again, maybe a different pricing model for consultants. For customers, you need to build a business case. If you're a consultant, surely this is the easiest decision you've made all day, even easier than the decision you have when you go to Starbucks and you try and order a coffee where they ask you about another 15 questions after you've ordered a coffee. So for a consultant, this is a pretty straightforward decision, which is, can you help your customers understand their orgs better, more quickly? Can you understand the risk of making changes to a customer's org? Yeah, Elements does that for you for $500 a year. Pretty straightforward.
That is an amazing price.
Well, it needs to be an amazing price because I was a consultant and I know how cheap we are. If we can possibly get away with not spending money, we will. And we need to make it really easy for consultants to do a better job, which is why we deliberately priced it at a level where they should go, yeah, of course. If we made this $5,000, which is, maybe that's the value, I don't know. But if we made it $5,000, every consultant would suck their teeth and go, well, maybe I can't justify it. You make it 500 and suddenly every consultant just goes, who sees it says, well, yes, of course I need it.
How can I afford not to have it almost?
Exactly.
Ian, this has been great. Where can people find more about you online?
Go to Elements.Cloud. Obviously, there's plenty of information on the website. Click up on the book a demo, come and talk to us, find out whether it's relevant to you, or come and find us at one of the events. So if you're in the partner space, then the team is going out to Puerto Rico to the .org partner event. But you'll catch us at Dreamforce or any of the dreaming events. And obviously, you can find us online. If you want to chat about any of this with me, then come and find me on LinkedIn. It's very easy. It's LinkedIn/IAN or /Ian Gotts. So I'm pretty easy to find. IANGOTTS.
And we'll add all these links into the show notes. Ian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, my pleasure. Been really good fun talking to you. And hopefully we've inspired some nonprofits to get more out of Salesforce.
Absolutely. All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again next time for Agents of Nonprofit.